But yeah, this is my brain. It's a mess, and it's a little
God.
too dedicated to guitars that I play poorly and stuff like that. So.
I didn't know you were a guitar player. That's so cool.
Well, I'm not. Yeah. I have guitars. I won't claim to be a guitar player. It's a lifelong addiction that you never get over.
I know. I play the guitar, and I'm in a mom band called Mama Drama. So
cool.
We play locally in New Jersey, but I do play the electric, and it's just my life's goal. I felt like I missed that boat when I was younger, and I started like after I had kids, and we all said, let's just do something that makes us happy. So it's awesome.
Well, I think that's such an important part of building or living the brand that is you. And by the way, I just roll right into we're already talking, we're already podcasting because that's the way I roll. But I want to fold in what you were saying, which was, I think I missed something when I was younger and I wanted to take advantage of it now. I mean, I'm putting my own words on what you were saying, but I think that's what a lot of people feel. It's like, oh, I should have started blogging earlier. I should have started podcasting earlier. I should have done everything earlier. Everybody's so much cooler than I ever was and all that stuff. To which I say, yeah, that might be a little bit true. But the reality is the only thing that's stopping you from starting today is you. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is one of the biggest things to overcome. So the fact that you and some other moms got together to create a mom band, I think is fantastic. And, it has to be something that's 100% pure joy.
It is. It's our outlet. We have band practice tonight. So once a week we get together and it's like our night where we can, have some wine and really play. And we have also been writing our own music, which is fun. So now we play like half covers, half originals. And it's just something that we are addicted to. We just love it. And we laugh that we're going to go on tour when we're in our 60s down to Florida and, play the route.
Yep.
So we never want to give it up. But again, it's never too late. And I always say that if you want something bad enough, you can absolutely make it happen, no matter how old you are. So you just have to want it bad enough and have that passion and drive.
Well, and I think being in that cohort that I would call older, as I scratch my gray beard, I would say that the good thing about getting older is you just don't give a rip anymore. And it's I know I'm not going to be I'm not going to be down Instagram influencer, 20-year-old in a hot bikini body. Well, I was never going to be that. But, those days are long gone. And frankly, I don't care. I've been scared so long in my life. I'm done being scared. Yeah. And now I'm going to be me.
You're right. Absolutely. I look back, even if you said 5 years ago, I'd be playing on a stage, playing for a 40-minute set in front of all these people, I would have said, you're crazy. And now I don't, you get to a point where you're like, I don't care. I'm just doing my thing. I don't, we're not really trying to be anyone. We're just moms having fun. So.
Well, but it's not only moms having fun. It's Carey being Carey, if you ask me. Yeah. And, podcast listeners, we are just meeting because Carey is a friend of a friend, Allison K. Summers, who was on, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago. We hit it off like crazy because we met at a speaking engagement where she was speaking and I was speaking. 2 years later, we finally get on a podcast together and find out, oh my God, we love each other. And she turns around and says, well, I think you need to meet Carey. Yes. And so consequently, I'm meeting Carey for the very first time via podcast, which, by the way, is one of the reasons you have a podcast, because you can reach out to people like Carey, who's located out on the eastern seaboard someplace between New Jersey and New York, while I'm here in the corn-fed Midwest outside of Madison, Wisconsin. That doesn't stop me because I can ask and she can say no. But she said yes.
I was so honored. Once I found you and I was listening to your other podcasts with Mark and Allison, and it was awesome. So I'm bowing down to you as a podcast host. I have a lot to learn and love, everything that you're doing, the people you're bringing on and sharing their stories.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear, because one of the things about being a podcaster is you never, even if you're looking at your analytics on a minute by minute basis, you never know if anybody's really listening. I mean, I feel like, who was it in Pump Up the Volume, that movie with, what's his name? it doesn't matter, but it's nice to know that someone's listening and actually finding some value out of it, especially the conversations that I'm having with really smart people like you, Carey Balogh. Now, with a name like Knudten, I am very concerned about pronouncing someone's last name correctly. Do I have Balogh correctly?
Oh gosh, I admit I do not pronounce my last name correctly. It's supposed to rhyme with Kellogg, so it's Balogh, but it's Bal. It's Hungarian, so sometimes I'll say Balogh so people get it, but it's Balogh. Rhymes with Kellogg.
Well, there you go.
But my maiden name was Migliaccio, which means black pudding in Italian, and that was somewhat easier to say. So
Migliaccio. See, I can say that.
See, there you go.
The thing that confuses me is the GH at the end. There's so many different pronunciations of GH, but anyway, I digress, as is my wont. But I want to talk to you, going back to your mom bandness, which you kind of say, well, I'm in a mom band. And I'm like, no, looking at your website, looking at your logo avatar, which is kind of like the cover of a Rolling Stones album with the lips and the parted lips and all that stuff. And unknown to you podcast listeners, right over her shoulder is a neon sign with that self-same image. It seems to me you definitely want to kind of have a graphic avatar for who you are and the way you roll. Mm-hmm. And that happens to be bright red lipstick, a slightly open mouth, and what looks to be half friendly, half terrifying at the same time.
It's really, I think of it like branding, like word of mouth and, getting the word out. Although I must admit, our office is right next to a dentist. So we get like 5 people a day that come by and like, is this a dentist? And we're like, no, we probably need to, do a better sign. But it definitely is for, branding and a little sexy. We're trying to make brands sexy. So that's the goal, and make people talk about them.
Well, let's talk about that. When, especially that word sexy. Now, I've worked in advertising forever, and we use sexy all the time to describe something that's interesting, that's fun, that's eye-catching. And sometimes it might have a little bit of a sexual connotation involved with it as well, because as we all know from the good days of Don Draper and Mad Men, sex sells.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what you're talking about. When you say you help people make their brands sexy, what do you mean?
So it's funny. I just realized this and came to the term making brands sexy actually this year, because my background is fashion PR. So I, produced fashion shows. I lived in Milan for 3 years. I was in fashion, like the depths of fashion. And so everything was so detail oriented, so intense, so 2 steps ahead. Everything had to be, sexy. And it was such a saturated market. But after actually this year, when, COVID hit, my business pivoted organically. And our niche is actually commercial real estate, traditional companies. Like one of our biggest clients is an HVAC company for commercial buildings, schools, restaurants. My other client is a major architecture firm in Manhattan. And so what we've realized is, although you would think those types of like architecture and design, you would think is sexy, but when you actually look at all of their competitors, you'd be surprised that they still are archaic and they're more traditional. So we've realized that our, differentiator is adding our fashion backgrounds to more traditional markets and making them sexy and stand out, if that makes sense.
Oh, I love that. It's the old saying, clothes make the man. Well, in riffing off what you're saying, I'm going to guess a couple things. And before I ask this question, I want to kind of set the table for listeners. When you talk to people who are involved in advertising and marketing, you can be talking to people who come from distinctly different places. For example, Carey has mentioned fashion PR, public relations. Oftentimes it's more press relations than it is public relations, because it's about getting people to shows or getting them to talk to the designers. And, so it's I need to get press there.
Yes.
So, and I'm not saying that's all you do, but I'm saying that I come from an ad agency, a traditional ad agency background, where our view of branding is typically everything from the way you answer your phone to your CEO's public behavior. Everything is a brand touch point. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, there are other people who are former journalists who have come into the advertising and marketing space, especially since newspapers are going the way of the dodo. And they're finding out that people still need their stories told in an artful way. So they use the written word and primarily that type of skill set. The reason I'm setting this up this way is to say, I'm going to guess, correct me if I'm wrong, that you as a fashion PR background is approaching the art and craft of advertising, marketing, and branding from a slightly different point of view than someone like me who comes from a traditional agency background. Would you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, fashion, for example, my background, I worked a lot with licenses. So I was PR director for Gucci watches, for Hublot watches, or Calvin Klein Collection was a license. So we would get, we were an extension of the main brand, and we would get this big fat branding book, and it would tell us for Calvin Klein Collection, for example, how much water to put into an orchid pot, because the orchid pots were glass vases. So they would literally tell you exactly how much water down to that. And so also you could only have like black paper clips, and you couldn't, you use certain colored pens. So, I guess detail down to the very last button and detail is how I was trained. So I'm almost obsessive, and I was, learning every branding touch point to excess, because, every single thing mattered, every single detail mattered. And you mentioned the voicemail as well. Like we do the voicemail messages for our HVAC client because it wasn't matching up with the whole new branding and the new logo and all the merchandise, all the touch points that we did to rebrand them, for example. So I think it's, having that fashion training where everyone was really a little crazy and intense. So it really, set the stage for, me being so obsessive about every single detail and trying to get through being a perfectionist. But, you can't help but look at every single detail of a brand through that fashion lens.
This episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by my new book, Nonfiction Brand. Discover, craft, and communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are, now available on Amazon.com. Jay Baer, best-selling author of Talk Triggers, said, "The book is outstanding, highly recommended, a spectacularly useful guide to personal branding that pulls off the difficult trick of being both realistic and inspirational. A must-read, regardless of where you are in your own brand-building journey." To get your copy, head on over to Amazon.com and search Nonfiction Brand. And let's get you all the credit you deserve for the completely true, completely you brand you already are.
Well, I think that's fascinating because you combined two businesses in the stories you've told so far that I'm kind of going, that's interesting. High fashion in Milan and HVAC from a guy in New Jersey.
Exactly. So I used to be giving out $1,000 handbags and watches, and now we're giving, Wawa gift cards to our top clients for, $100. So we were laughing because my vice president of PR, she was a VP of fashion brands for, 14 years in New York City. And we laugh how things have changed, but we love it. We feel like we've found our niche, and we don't, we worked for Gucci, we worked for all these big brands, and we don't feel we need to say that anymore. Like we did it, now we're like, what? These are stable companies they love what we do. They give us creative freedom, and we're the creative leads, and you can't ask for anything more to be able to, see your vision through.
Yeah, longtime listeners to the podcast will know that I love to trot out this saying over and over again. Commodities are purchased at the lowest possible price, but premium brands are purchased at a premium. I mean, and you're talking about Gucci. Come on. Yeah. That handbag that has maybe, I'm going to say $150 worth of leather and, accoutrement and stuff like that, and you're selling it for $3,500, and that's the low end version. Gucci gets Gucci dollars by not being a commodity. Instead, they are a brand, and not just a premium brand, but a luxury brand. And I'm going to guess you will relate to this story. It's an old story from the good old days of my advertising background. I once heard a guy tell me, "Did you hear the story about the Cadillac that was sold for $10,000 too little?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And who knows? It could be Cadillac. It could be Audi. I've heard this story 1,000 times, but they're making a point, which was Audi / Cadillac / whoever it was wanted to come out with an entry-level version of their car. So they came out with one and they priced it at a price point the market would not buy because it was $10,000 too cheap. Because if you can afford to buy a Cadillac, you don't look at the price. And that was the point. So what did they do? They relaunched it by upping the actual price of the vehicle by $10,000, and it started to sell. Because again, people had an expectation of a brand. Like, there is no such thing as a discount Cadillac. There is no such thing as a discount Gucci bag or something like that. Exactly. There is the drooling knowledge that your best friend is green with envy because you just happen to walk in with a new Gucci bag and go, oh, this thing?
This thing?
And they said it was a sample sale, right? You got that at a sample sale.
I know. I'm taking out with the new movie coming out, The House of Gucci. I'm like finding all my old Gucci things. But you're so right, and we always laughed because when I was in the watch industry, working with Hublot, we always used to say Timex probably told better time as a quartz, but than the mechanical watches. But of course, you buy it for the brand. And I had a genius client, Jean-Claude Biver was his name, and he took Hublot from when it was bankrupt. And then by the time 5 years later, sold it to LVMH, the luxury fashion brand. But he came out with an all black watch. You could not even read the time. And I didn't get it at first. And then I was like, oh my gosh, because if you have this watch, you don't need to tell the time. You have an assistant to tell the time. You are too high up there and too important to worry about that. You could not find it. It was sold out for years. The all black Hublot was just insane. It made history.
Because it served the marketplace and the marketplace expectation, which is if I want data, you get one of these. I'm showing her my Apple Watch, which has nuclear launch codes and the schematic of the Death Star inside it. It's got everything. But guess what? Someone who's not like me, who, I'm trying to think of a big watch collector who's noted as call it an addict for expensive watches. And they don't buy those watches to know what time it is or what day it is, or if they got a notification via Bluetooth. They put it on because this was the Rolex that Paul Newman wore, the 24 hour of Le Mans in 1965.
Exactly.
And if anyone saw what that Paul Newman Rolex went for, you'll understand what I'm talking about, which is, oh my God, people pay that kind of money?
Yeah.
To which I say, not everybody does.
No.
But the people who love that brand do. Now, I want to kind of pull this back and relate it back to the main subject of this podcast, which is kind of personal branding, small business branding, the kind of idea that your small business brand is your personal brand. Because if you are employee owned, then your employees, including yourself, are the brand.
Sure.
How do you relate Gucci to New Jersey HVAC?
Well, we have, looked at the brand. We do a deep dive, figure out the brand pillars. And, we're like, who is going to be, who is going to lead this? And of course, our client Encon is a 50-year-old second generation family business. There are 3 generations working there. So the founder is in his 80s, still works there. His son is the president, who has, when I say probably grew the company, 10 times what it was. And so they are dynamic leaders. They're a family business. So we have used the current president, who also is in the YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, to use him to be the face of the brand, and humanize this brand. We get him on podcasts. We use sound clips from audiograms from his podcast interviews. We get him press, and we fuel social media and PR. I coined it, I don't know if I'm the first to do it, but so PR, because the social media fuels the PR and vice versa. And we've raised his profile that he can't go anywhere without people saying, oh my God, David, I saw you on that podcast. I read about you in that article. And all of a sudden he has all this press. We actually printed out all of his articles. They are covering his headquarters. And it has just increased the word of mouth. So by bringing him to the forefront, humanizes this HVAC company. And, it really has helped take to the next level.
Well, let's relate that to my previous statement about commodities being bought for the lowest possible price, but brands are purchased at a premium. you have created a premium brand by using this individual, this personal brand within the larger company brand, or what I like to call an umbrella brand. That's the HVAC company, but the people in it can be individual personal brands that actually, mixing metaphors here, rise the tide on the boat of the company that floats everything up because they're known to become known. You know, Mark Schaefer's got that great book called Known about the value of personal branding. And I love to point to Mark Schaefer's books because he's a big friend of the podcast and the dude knows his stuff. I'm just saying. So it's cool that you have been able to take what could be considered a commodity sector, HVAC. What is that? Heating, ventilation, air conditioning.
Yes. Yep.
Yawn, yawn, yawn all day long, boring, boring, and made it interesting, especially in the time of COVID, when commercial real estate is taking a hit like you would not believe. And I'm guessing your architecture clients are facing that as well, because again, architects can be highly accredited and certified and everything else.
Yes.
But unless they're a brand, they're just like any other architecture firm out there.
And you're right. And, you know, and how do they stand out? So I think our philosophy is finding clients to partner with that do have that dynamic leadership. And, you know, over at Mancini Duffy, they've been around for over 100 years, but the president bought the firm maybe 6 or 7 years ago and treats it like a startup with tech first innovation. And we just launched a podcast for him called the Anti-Architect Podcast. And in his industry, he is like making waves. Like on the golf course, people are like, I listened to your podcast. Clients have called up and literally said, I heard your podcast. I would like a proposal for this. I think it was like a hotel in the city project. So we're seeing return on investment like right away. And it's incredible, but it depends on the industry, you know, because he's really standing out in his industry where there's not much going on and using the fashion, the beauty, the wellness, more of the trendy brands on Instagram or what they're doing and applying it to that firm.
That's a core tenet of personal branding, going all the way back to the brilliant Tom Peters article in 1997 in Fast Company magazine called The Brand Called You. It was not about taking sunset shots of you in a bikini looking fabulous. It was about packaging yourself using the techniques of packaged goods so that people understand who you are, what you do, and how you do it, and then want to engage with you because they're like, oh, I heard that podcast. And I expect architects to be kind of stodgy and buttoned down. And you've got a podcast called the Anti-Architect Podcast. Tell me more, because that's interesting.
Totally. Yep. And they want to know. And now we have merch, we have hats, and people are like so excited. What is the Anti-Architect? And then they go listen. It's like you can't ask for more for them to be, get people excited. You really have to get their attention these days.
And I'm guessing that anti-architectness is highly dependent on the person themselves.
Yes.
This guy has got to be, based on that name, a little bit iconoclastic, a little bit in your face, a little bit, your baby's ugly, and I'll tell you why. A little bit confrontational, a little bit, dare I say, New Jersey.
Well, we are based in New Jersey, but the offices are between New York and New Jersey. But he is disrupting the industry through tech first innovation and really doing things his way, and wants to really disrupt the traditional, like you said, buttoned up architecture firm with everything from company culture to their technology to they're 50% women. Like the culture is incredible and the diversity. And so he's really, making a mark in that stodgy industry. I can say that.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're doing branding based on one person who happens to work in the firm, who then influences the entire firm's persona and notoriety and reputation. And I'm guessing there are some people who don't like it. But guess what? Don't worry about them, because they weren't going to like him anyway. But the ones who are like, hey, I like the cut of your jib. They're the ones calling up saying, hey, we've got an RFP for a new project. We'd love to have you guys bid on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he realized that he's really the best one for new business development, so he's really doing that himself, and it makes sense to put him in that position. And there are 5 shareholders, and there are 2 women who also have personal brands going. So we use their angles for different things.
Yeah, and you can use them as a foil against him.
Yeah.
If he's the swashbuckling pirate, you can have someone who can calm them down a little bit, and or direct that energy in different areas. And there's a reason an old trope from cop shows is that you got a good cop and a bad cop. To get things done, you need a little bit of good cop and you need a little bit of bad cop. And that's the way the world rolls.
Yeah, they balance each other out well.
Yeah.
So it's
that's
great.
That's really interesting. So you literally are taking all the background and experience you have in fashion marketing, and you're applying it to industries that a lot of people would look at you and go, "What are you talking about?"
Yes. Yeah, it's, and just staying on the cutting edge, like with social media, doing reels. And, we did video. I remember when I was first I started doing their Instagram page in 2017. And what I thought was, I'm just doing my thing. Like, this is how I would always do an Instagram, really keeping on brand and knowing all of their brand pillars and really very, strategic. And people were talking about their Instagram, and I'm like, I'm not doing anything like crazy. But that's just how I was trained. And I didn't realize that it was like that background and really wasn't around that industry. I just thought, they're designers, they get it. But it was totally different. Nobody was marketing the same way.
And no one was coming at it from what I think probably is your natural point to start anything, which is, what is your story? What
Absolutely.
are the stories we can tell? And what are the commonalities between the disparate stories that we can continually get out there in the marketplace and reinforce with everything we do the same thing?
You're right. Mm-hmm.
That is so key because, I'm a writer, so I get story. And I have worked with designers, and this is not a slam against graphic designers, so please forgive me. I know not all graphic designers are like this, but my very first job, I had a graphic designer come into my office and say, "See this paragraph? I need it to be half that." And I'm like, no. The design needs to be able to carry that, because this is not about your design. It's about the story we have to tell. Now, we, of course, wrestled it out, and I did do some editing.
Yes.
But there's that friction occasionally between, I want it to look nice. And it's like, the story is not about looking nice. The story is about being a little bit brash. So how do we balance that? And I'm guessing you have that battle on a regular basis.
Yeah. There's so much that goes into it, and social media as far as getting that down, and, working with creative people and designers too, have all these ideas, but I'm like, it has to function on social media, like it has to fit in the box. And then for stories, it has to be this way. And there are so many different touch points, and really have to know all the 360-degree branding for that. But it is a balance you're right, to get the copy right, to get the voice right, to get the creative right. And it's interesting how we've evolved into a content machine. Like we are just spitting out content nonstop. And that it wasn't like that even 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But now it's just like we're like a factory over here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I definitely want to talk more about that in next week's episode. But for now, I want to wrap this one up by saying I'm speaking, of course, with Carey Balogh, and she is of Brand Groupies out there in the New Jersey, New York area. How can people connect with you online?
They can find us at Brand Groupies on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. BrandGroupies and brandgroupies.com.
Imagine that, having handles that are all the same on every single social channel. You're probably,
my goodness. I know.
You're probably one of the few who do that. And this is okay. So longtime listeners of this podcast will realize that. Yes, I wrote about this in my first book about how I was self-loathing copywriter on one thing, and I was DP Knudten, spelled like canoe 10. And then one day I go, well, I got to change these, but I can't. Nobody knew me as these other things. So I went and reconciled everything across the board, spelled it the same way. So if you want to find me, it's DP Knudten. The hardest thing you're going to have to do is figure out how I spell my last name.
Yes.
And that's hard enough. So anyway, but I love the fact that Brand Groupies is Brand Groupies on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook.
Yes. And the podcast, I called it Brand Groupies too, because I just thought, who wants to try to market a different name? Let's just keep it all the same.
Well, and also before we leave, what's the name of your mom band?
Mama Drama. So it's Mama Drama Band on Instagram, MAMADRAMA.
You have any gigs coming up?
And we are booking a few. We had one in July and it was our first time on stage in 16 months. So everybody I think everyone was just excited to get out. So we, we're just looking at a few more dates in September.
Well, there you go. You're hearing it straight from the personal brand called Carey Balogh, the electric guitarist. Are you the lead guitarist? Are you a rhythm guitarist?
I am. Yes. And we have a song out called MILF, Moms in Leather Forever, on Spotify. So if you're feeling like doing a mom anthem, you could check it out.
Because that's what MILF stands for. That's it for this week on the I'm sorry, I'm not going any further down that trail. That's got landmines all over it. And that's fine because it's time to end this episode of the Nonfiction Brand Podcast. I'm your host, DP Knudten, and I'd love for you to like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast wherever you get it, because that really helps other people find it. And my guest today is the lovely and talented
Carey Balogh.
And we'll be coming at you again next week. Bye-bye.